buses, personnel, etc. As Mrs. Ekstrom says, I'm not trying to alarm anybody, but I write proposals every day in my career. And when you give somebody the opportunity to bid on a full menu, the price tends to go down. Whereas if they say, I'll do the management, I don't want your garage, I'll do the bus, I won't figure out the bus routes, the price goes up. So I'd like to see that done as a full menu for the town of Wareham school bus transportation et al.
Now,
Thank you.
Madam Chair, could I ask Selectman Holmes a question?
Please.
Thank you. If you do a full menu, and you get a price, say you get a 1.3 price or a 1.5, you say, okay, if that's something that you're looking at, could you go back if you say, yeah, but we really wanted to keep these employees, or we wanted to keep the garage, or whatever, that we could go back and negotiate? That's something that can be done, right?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay,
yeah.
I just want to make sure, thank you.
I think that, you look at the full boat, and you don't have to accept any or all bids,
Right.
correct? Mr. Andrews? So I think you put it out there. These folks know what it takes to run a bus company. I'm not sure that we do as a municipality. There are professionals in the business. And I'll tell you that I've received calls from parents. My kid's on a bus with 12 students, and it's a 50 or 60 passenger bus driving around town that's empty all the time, and it's not just one. So I think that somebody who is making profit off of this business tends to take care of those items and reduce costs. So I think that put it out there as a full menu item, see what it comes back at, and then maybe we'll have that by November or December when the committee reconvenes, and you can present it on behalf of the Board of Selectmen as our liaison to that committee. Thank
Okay.
you.
Mr. Cruz?
I think Mr. Holmes has a good idea, because once you put out full, and once you put the contract out and start chopping, then it's going to go right back to the original. They're going to go up on their price. So the full menu, I think, would be the best way to go. And if something happens, then we can look at it and see where we stand.
Well, the chairman of the school committee, superintendent of schools, Mr. Andrews, and I met a week ago Monday about a number of issues that we had planned to start meeting back in the spring and were unable to find scheduled time during the summer due to conflicts, but this topic came up during the discussion that we had, and Mr. Andrews and I, probably more so me than Mr. Andrews, hotly debated the suspension of the committee and the original purpose of the committee, which was presented to Mr. Andrews and I back last spring as a committee to look at insourcing, outsourcing, should we contract the buses out. Putting together an RFP was the upshot of the objective of the committee in both of our recollections, and I advised the superintendent and the chairman that I was sure that the board was going to feel very strongly about going out for an RFP, and the superintendent of schools wanted to have some input to that RFP process. I don't see how the two would, preclude one another for us to go out with a reverse auction to get a feel for it as a first step, and then try to collaborate to get an RFP out. He made a commitment to Mr. Andrews that the RFP, such as it might be, regardless of, I'm not saying that we shouldn't go out for a reverse auction. I agree with you 100% on that. I think we need to go out for that because that gives us a ballpark range as to what we're looking at. And the whole idea of going out with the RFP and comparing apples to apples was where we started with down this road. And I think that the superintendent and the school committee chair, albeit perhaps somewhat slow to agree, came to the conclusion with Mr. Andrews and myself that an RFP needs to go out and needs to go out sooner than later. Mr. Andrews said he could have an RFP ready to go in 30 days. So if the board wants to go ahead and vote for Mr. Andrews to go in the direction of the reverse auction, I'm in favor of that. I also think that we should have a consensus of the board that Mr. Andrews continue to work, or start to work, I should say, because nothing has been done so far, to be perfectly honest with you, to get a real RFP out there, and that the reverse auction information can be very useful in that process. So, any further discussion? Well, we have a motion and a second on the floor to ask Mr. Andrews to put out a reverse auction on the school buses to get us a ballpark figure. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? 400. Mr. Andrews, if you can put that in motion, please. And then I would look for a consensus of the board, or perhaps even a motion on the RFP process, if the board feels we need something like that as well.
Well, if I may, Madam Chair,
Please.
I'm not necessarily opposed to it, except for Dr. Rabinovich did bring an RFP to the committee from 1999, with the date 1999 scribbled out and 2006 put in, that he didn't want buses older than 5 years old when we're running 12-year-old buses. Again, goes back to the apples and apples.
Sure.
I don't have necessarily, and I'm not necessarily opposed to it. However, I think that
Town
I think-
administrator needs to
I think that the town
make
administrator needs
sure.
that, and I think that if this was a concern and a priority, maybe the superintendent would have shown up at the school department, at the garage, when there were issues, rather than denying them. That's all I'll say. So I would rather allow Mr. Andrews to do this, give us a feel for it, and then, whatever that is, we'll go back.
Well, that's very good, because we have voted to, for Mr. Andrews to take that action. I would strongly recommend that we continue down the RFP path, understanding that there are some issues that need to be watched closely with any RFP that would go out, and it would not go out until after the reverse auction report came back in, because we definitely want to compare apples to apples. We don't want to say we're only going to run buses that are less than 5 years old when we're currently running buses that are over 10 years old. We need to be able to get a true picture, and part of that RFP process will bring in the capital plan that you mentioned earlier, the expense of having to buy new buses every year, which we have not been able to do in the past 6 or 7 years, at least. So I think that we can get a thorough vetting of this issue and get back to the citizens of the community with what is the most cost-effective way to manage these resources, and what is the safest way to manage these resources for our children who are being transported on these buses. So I think we pretty much have given you some direction, Mr. Andrews. Mr. Holmes, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to, because we are talking about two different things. I want to make sure that if he's putting together documentation, preparing an RFP, that also includes a full menu of the Department of Transportation for the town, not just buses, and not.
Right.
I want to go on the premise that he's going to do a full menu, right?
Mr. Andrews,
Yes.
I think that's what the board is asking you
I
to.
understand.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Did you have any other liaison reports, Mrs. Ekstrom?